I think the whole debate about financial regulation has now got to a position where we are starting from the wrong starting point. There's a debate that seems to be taking place in a parallel universe, really, that bears virtually no relation to reality. The 2008 crash has led people to believe that financial services in general, and banking in particular, were sort of wholly unregulated, Wild West, capitalist industries or services, and nothing could be further from the truth. We had very heavy regulation in the banking sector, bad regulation as well in my mind, but certainly not light touch regulation. And there's a danger now, I think, that we're trying to make everything in financial services safe, when the real name of the game, the real trick, is to try and make sure not that banks, for example, are safe, but to make sure that bank failure is safe. So when a financial services institution goes to the wall, it doesn't bring down the entirety of Western capitalism with it. I think all of the regulation since the crisis is too complex, and again has been too much about safety. If we were to look, for example, at the Vickers Commission's suggestion on firewalling or ring fencing, the difference between the retail arm and the investment arm of a banking operation, I think this is entirely wrong-headed. It sends out the signal that retail banking is sort of super safe, and investment banking, is treated like casino gambling. And actually, banking is a spread of risks. I think it's the wrong idea to say to people, if you put your money in a retail bank, it's 100% safe. Whereas if you go for the investment side, it's like gambling on the GGs. What we need to be clear and honest to people about is actually all sorts of banking and financial services are risky, and we've got to make sure that the right people shoulder the right risks. I think the problem that Osborne and the coalition have got themselves into, and what we call salami slicing, is they haven't actually looked at spending in a comprehensive or strategic fashion. They've sort of, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but sort of, email every cabinet minister asking them to sort of save money on stationery, paper clips, find efficiency savings. And what we can learn from successful fiscal consolidations, say those that took place in Canada and New Zealand, is you really got to, if you want to get public finances under control, look at whole areas of government activity that you're willing to close down. In short, you're better to shut down 10% of government departments or projects entirely, rather than trying to trim 5 or 10% off every single government project. So I think that the amounts that are being saved are pretty feeble. It could well be until the next decade, sometime in the 2020s, before the budget is finally balanced, and I think that's far too long a period of time. It would be far better to look at whole areas of spending and kill them off. Well, I think that the relationship with the European Union, and indeed the structure of the European Union itself, putting aside the UK's membership, has got to change radically. I think that the single market process, I used to be a huge fan of 15 or so years ago, is in danger of actually morphing into a statist, heavy-handed, interfering project in which bureaucrats are making all sorts of decisions that they should not be making. I'd like to see the EU return to being something more akin to a free trade area and a free trade agreement, possibly, with some common standards across it, some elements of a single market. We're a mile away from that. Now, I think that means that the UK does need to seek to change its own relationship with the EU, and whatever comes out of that process should indeed be put to people in a referendum. But I think we've got to encourage the EU itself to think about radically reforming and doing considerably less, much better. I think the economy is going to pretty much dominate the political debate and indeed the general election of 2015. Now, what does one mean about the economy? Well, I think it breaks down in political terms into two huge areas. One is the overall macro picture. What does economic growth look like? Will the coalition be able to go back to the electorate and say, we're out of the woods, or as George Osborne's recently said, we're sort of out of intensive care? Will things look a bit better than that? Is it possible we would have even been discharged from hospital entirely by the time of the 2015 election? So I think the overall picture, whether economic growth is 2% or 0%, is going to be quite important. But within that, I think the micro picture is quite important as well. and the cost of living and the standard of living. How are overstretched are household budgets? What's the cost of energy, the cost of housing, the cost of food? So, how can people live within their means in a very tight economic environment will be a big part of that debate too. So wider economic credibility, but also trying to actually ease the pressure, the cost of living pressures on average households.